I can't see why I can't get in. Click open Zoom meetings. I can't see where to click. Are you available?
Ordinary prize. An entire beachside apartment complex on the Gold Coast. $1.3 million in gold, plus a luxury adventure package worth $285,000. Don't miss your chance to win. Buy your $10 ticket today at rslarchunion.com.au.
You can't walk past it, you can't not look at it.
So, Mr. Morrison, why have you walked past the recommendation of registered nurses 24 hours a day in private aged care? Authorised by Health Fitzpatrick, Australian Nursing and Midwifery Federation, Melbourne.
Your smash plan.
To America by myself when I moved to Newcastle. I traveled by myself in and out, just in that trip. Contacted over Instagram and Facebook and stuff like that. The thing I love about traveling around is flexibility. And you can always miss out. I missed out on Morocco when I was in Europe in 2019 because I stayed in Prague, Vienna, and Rome for longer. So I was able to see something interesting was happening. I just stayed longer in different places because of my that flexibility that I get to negotiate with anyone. I just say, okay, I'm going to stay because this performance festival on in Prague. Someone doing a street fair invited me to it and stuff in Vienna.
Good morning. We'll start in 1 moment.
Good morning.
Yes, but some people do that intimacy. That's the
Right, that's what I'm saying, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. But you can't have a spread action, you know, the whole thing about shivers and learning together.
That's right.
Well, that's the
But
one.
we did used to have it.
Will.
Yeah, yeah, but it was spread out. It was long, but every single chair was. taken.
Right, exactly.
So-
I'll put it to our Zoomers. Yes, we're on Zoom. I'll put it to our Zoomers. Hello, good morning. I have a
Morning.
question for our Zoomers. If we make the room bigger and people sit more spaciously, will you be willing to come back in person?
Yes, I
Silent.
think so.
Show of hands. Oh, you
Yes,
said you
It hasn't got to do with me with the space. It's just become convenient, but I'm hoping, please God.
How am I going to make Zoom inconvenient for you, Karen? So I don't want to threaten to cut you off.
I think I'll start at the beginning of next year because
So,
we've
right,
only got.
certainly after the beginning of next year, I'd love to have more people.
Yeah.
The ratio of Zoom to room to sort of tip the other way would be wonderful.
Right.
Yes.
But,
How many
until
do we
then,
have? How many do we have in the room now, Rabbi?
Today is a smaller crowd. Today was 30. You guys are all on your own. Yeah. No, we're in Zoom have it in favor. We're on a smaller crowd today, but I think we're also heading to Mind on the Summer. So yeah.
But Rabbi Brill, how many more have we got for this year?
This year, so that's also something we have to discuss. But I mean, I imagine that probably have a couple. There's usually a couple of weeks break for this year as well, or you go through.
I wouldn't mind it going through. I'd be happy, but
People, I think, will be happy. We might have 1 week break the first week of January, but otherwise, I'm happy to keep going through if people are. So, and then we'll keep Zoom open. So if people are away in Queensland or wherever, they can also still tune in.
Oh, well, there you are. So,
There you
so
go.
that's the point, isn't it? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's.
Thank
So
you.
let's. Anyway, so
Thank you.
we'll probably have 1 week break, but I'm happy to keep going for now. So let's. Let us begin. Okay. So, all right. Talida's getting angry. All right. So this week's parasha, we find ourselves Parashat Vayechi, and again, it's ladies. See, I can't mute you, so this is my weekly problem. That's the one saving grace of Zoom. Yeah, all good. So this week's parasha, obviously Vayechi. So Yaakov Avinu is obviously, I mean, it's the end of Yaakov's life. It's also the end of Yosef's life, but predominantly we'll be looking at the end of Yaakov's life. In terms of a couple of things that he does at the end of his life. Among the things that Yaakov does at the end of his life is he obviously addresses Yosef a couple of times with a couple of requests. One of which is to be buried in Eretz Canaan, and another one is he also has a conversation reminiscing about why his mother was not buried in Ma'at Machpelah, Rachel, because she died on the way, and that's something we will also look at, as well as a couple of other points. Primarily the brachot, a couple of the brachot that Yaakov give to some of the shvatim, some of the tribes. Okay, so let's start looking at the beginning of the psukim. Mem Zayin, right, obviously the beginning of the parasha. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim shva esrei shana. Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. Vayehi yimei Yaakov shnei chayav sheva shanim v'arbei u'mat shmona. So he lived 147 years. He's in the last year of his life. What's fascinating is where else have we seen 17 years before? We saw it a few weeks ago. I remember. Yosef was 17, and clearly the Torah is very pertinent that the Torah has beginning of Vayeshev 17 years, beginning of Vayechi. It's almost like the Torah, so to speak, is like bookending the story. And yet, I spoke about this in Or David on Shabbat. And then you have sort of the structure in the middle, where you have basically the ascent and descent of Yosef on his journey, where he goes up, he gets thrown in the pit, then he has more dreams to interpret, he gets thrown in the prison pit, then he goes up again. So you have the structure, but it's clearly bookending the sort of the story of Yosef and the brothers for 17 years on each side. So the psukim continue, obviously, like Kruvu Yimei Yisrael Lamut, right? The days of Israel came to die. Vayikra livnol Yosef, he calls his son Yosef. Vayomer, he says, Imna matzati chen beinecha, if I find favor in your eyes, simnan yichach rechi, put your hand under my thigh. V'asiti midi chesed ve'emet, do with me kindness and truth. Al natik b'reini Mitzrayim. Please don't bury me in Egypt. Yes. Yeah.
Why did you stay 17 years? The family was only going to last 7 years.
Well, right, fascinating question. Why did they stay 17 years? Rambam will address about how long about why they stayed for so long. So Susan was asking, just so people can hear on the Zoom, why is it they stayed for 17 years if the famine was only going to be for 7 years? So we'll see what sort of happened. You don't know anyone who came on Shlichut for a couple of years and got stuck? Never been done before? No, but really. Yeah. So let's have a look. So in Pasuk Lamed v'shachavti em avotai, I will lie down with my fathers. V'nasatani Mitzrayim, you should carry me from Egypt. V'kravatani b'kvoratam, and bury me in their burial place. Vayomar, and Yosef says, Anochi esek yedrecha, I'll do it like your word. Vayomer, and he says, no, that's not good enough, your word. Hishavali, make an oath with me. Vayishavalo, and he swears to him. Vayishtachi Yisrael Rosh Hamita, and literally Yaakov Yisrael bows down in the bed like out of gratitude. So let's just discuss this bit. So yeah, Ramban opens the parsha by discussing just this whole idea of the 17 years and that they've still been in Egypt for a while. So let's look at the first Ramban. Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim 17 shana, 17 years. Kfar's character already mentioned, says Ramban. He read it Yaakov Mitzrayim hu galutenu hayom. So this is important. Again, Ramban evoking the idea of Maaseh Avot Simon Labanim, right here again, that by Yaakov going down to Egypt, that is sort of a symbol, if you like, of Galutenu Hayom, our Galut today, our exile today. But he adds Bayad Chaya Haravi'it, the fourth. He literally means animal in the pasuk from Daniel, but it means the fourth exile. Romi Harasha'ah, right? So the wicked Rome, right? As opposed to the four exiles, you have the Galut Mitzrayim, right? You have Egypt, then you have also Persia and Media, then you have Greece, and then you have Rome, which is often associated with Edom, is Rome, right? Which is those who destroyed the second temple. So now, in contrast to what he said in Parashat Lech Lecha, remember when he sort of blamed, this was when I was still pre-recorded, so I don't know who was here. So we blamed Ramban blamed that they're going down to Mitzrayim on the fact that Abraham and Sarah went down to Mitzrayim when they first arrived. Here he gives a different reason. He says, B'nei Yaakov that the Yaakov's sons themselves are the ones who caused their descent into Egypt, b'mechirat Yosef achihem, by selling their brother Yosef. V'Yaakov yarad sham ipnei harav, and Yaakov was forced down because of famine. V'chashav l'hinatzel im b'no b'veit ohevlo, and he thought, life is good, and I'm going to be saved here in the household of a person who loves my son. In other words, Paro. Ki Paro ohevet Yosef v'chuven lo. Paro loved Yosef; it was like a son to him. V'hayu svurim la'alot misham kechalot hara'av me'eretz Canaan. They thought they would ascend from there once the famine was over, back to when that famine in Canaan was over. Kamosha Amru, just as they'd said originally, right? What was the original claim? Lagur ba'aretz banu. We've come to sojourn in the land. Lagur as opposed to leishev, right? Or leshevet, right? Lagur ba'aretz banu, to sojourn. Ki en mir'el at son, because there's no pasture for the cattle, for the flock. Ashela avadecha, ki chaved harav be'eretz Canaan, because the famine is very strong in the land of Canaan. V'hinei lo alu, they did not ascend. Aval arach alehem hagalut, but the exile, meaning their spending time in Egypt, became lengthy. Umeit sham, and he died there. Va'alu at smotav, and instead it's his bones that went back to Canaan, but he himself didn't go back. V'ziknei Paro v'sarav he'eluhu, and it was in fact the elders, or the officers of Paro, who brought him up, right? Because they accompanied the brothers back up for the funeral. V'asu imo aval kaved, and they did a great mourning for him. I'm sorry, he's not answering that question. He just simply says they got stuck there. Yeah, they were comfortable there, right? Salary was better than in Canaan. What can I say? But they got comfortable there. But what Ramban does looks at it from a different angle. He doesn't look at it as to why they did it, but that this is detail for detail, Maaseh Avot Simon Labanim, a knock-on effect as to what happens later. Because Ramban has this theory that Yaakov, descent to Egypt, it parallels the long galut that we are in now, and he's going to explain. That's why he went through the story now, detail for detail, and he's going to match it to what he claims is detail for detail to the galuts that we're in now. He says as follows in the next paragraph. Listen to this. V'chen anachnu im Romi ve'Edom. So too are we in this exact situation with Rome and Edom. Achenu hasibunu bi'otenu bi'adam. Our brethren, our brothers, he's talking about the leadership at the time of the Second Temple, are the ones who caused us to fall into their hands, the same way that the brothers caused Yosef and the whole family to end up having to go down to Egypt because they knocked Yosef down. Why? Because they forged a covenant with the Romans. He's very critical of making a peace deal with the Romans. We've seen it a few times, but he's very critical of the Jews at Beit Sheni for making peace treaty with the Romans because they turned on us. So he says, Agrippas the king, right, the final king of the Second Temple, Barach alehem le'Ezra, ran to them for help, right? They relied solely on Rome for help. And due to famine, the people of Yerushalayim were also captured, which is parallel in Yaakov going down to Egypt. That's what Ramban is claiming here. That firstly, you have the Agrippas, the king, making a peace treaty with Rome. And he says that's like the brothers who sent Yosef down, because basically fell into the Egyptian hands. Then the Ra'av, the famine, is what caused Yaakov to go down with the family. And that's also what happened with the Anshe Yerushalayim at the time. This is Ramban's take on it. Whether the details are perfectly accurate or not is a different story, but it's fascinating just to see Ramban trying to put it measure for measure. The Hagalut arach aleinu ma'od. And the Galut, right, we also got comfortable, and the Galut has become many years over us for a long time. Lo noda kitso kshar galiot, and its end is not known, unlike the other exiles. It's the longest Galut. V'anachnu bo kametim, and we are in it like dead people. Omrim saying, Yavshu atzmotenu nigzarnu lan. Our bones have dried out, withered, right? It's been decreed on us. Again, paralleling the fact that Yaakov never actually made it back up, but simply died in Egypt, but never actually made it out. So we are, so to speak, also withering away. And what are we waiting for? That all the nations will bring us back up as a present, mincha, as a tribute to Hashem. They will have an avel kaved, a heavy mourning. The same way that the Mitzrayim and the Egyptian officers accompanied Yaakov up, his body up in mourning, like a respectable mourning, because they realized he was a respectable character. So too the other nations will accompany us back up in terms of when they see the glory that deserves us. And we'll see the vengeance of Hashem. Will bring us, stand us back up, and we will live before him. It's like a very obscure, but nonetheless fascinating just to see how Ramban looks at it. Like he really is looking for detail, trying to match up. Whether it's perfect or not, I'll leave for you to decide. But this idea that he really does look at the foreshadowing of Yaakov going down detail for detail, almost like he's looking forward to Beit Sheni and saying that's the same thing. But there's a couple of details which are really fascinating here, which I wanted to point out. One was that he's very critical of the treaty with the Romans. It's ironic because we know that when you look in the Gemara and stuff, they don't talk about that. They talk about the fact that they rebelled and there was infighting among the Jews more than being critical of because they ran to make peace with the Romans. But that's already at a later stage. He's saying already earlier on that their dependency on the Romans was misplaced. And then the Ra'av, but it's funny that he matches up measure for measure. And that's why he says, just like Yaakov got stuck down, that was inevitably going to happen to us as well. That's regarding Yaakov going down. So no, I don't have an answer to your question, Susan, why they got stuck, but definitely they're getting stuck. For Ramban had some sort of Kabbalistic metaphysical effect, if you like, that we too would also get stuck. Sorry? We're very comfortable in our Galut, but the picture that Ramban paints of, we're like, yeah, but the picture Ramban paints is that we're like Meitim, right? That we're, right. It's, so sorry. So we'll have to leave that question open, but they get stuck in the way that the whole family gets stuck, and they all have kids there. What they're going to make Aliyah without kids, So it's a difficult one for another time. We'll talk about it at Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yeah. Okay. So that's section 1. But then after that promise, there's another promise, which is basically Yaakov calling Yosef again, as an episode which happens slightly later, where basically Yosef goes back from Goshen to the main Mitzrayim proper, and then he's summoned back again that no, because he thought he was dying, but now he's like really sick and he has to come back again. And he said he's going to bless his children, Ephraim and Manasseh. So let's talk about that. So reminiscing about Rachel's burial comes up in a sort of random fashion. So let's look at it inside. The Psukim say, right, it happened after, came to be after these things. And it was told to Yosef, your father is sick. So he takes the son with him, and then he goes to meet Yaakov, who says, I'm not well, and he says, and I'm dying, and he says, and now the two children born to you in the land of Egypt, prior to my coming here to you, Mitzrayim to Mitzrayim, Lihem, they are sons to me. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be to me like Reuven and Shimon. In other words, like my sons. And any other children you have after them, they'll be your own. And they'll have nachala, they'll inherit the land under their brothers, but they won't have their own independent tribes. Like Ephraim and Manasseh have status of tribes. In other words, what's he doing? He's giving him a double portion. That's really what he's doing. In other words, what's he doing? He's giving Yosef, in some sense, Bechorah. He is giving him a double portion, the same as that Bechorah gets land, so you also get double. Then he throws in this random statement. Va'ani, and as for me, when I was coming back from Padan Aram, Meita alai Rachel be'eretz Canaan. Right, your mother Rachel died on me in the land of Canaan. Baderech, on the way. Od kivrat eretz lavo Ephrata. We're just a small, short land amount away, coming to Ephrat. Ve'ekbareh Hasham baderech Ephrat he Beit Lachem. So I buried her there on the road to Ephrat, which is Beit Lechem. Interesting, he's mentioning this now. And on the one hand, Rashi has what to say about it, and Ramban has a different take as to why he's suddenly mentioning this here. And like, it's always bothered me because in theory, this bit made much more sense in the previous section, because what was, meeting number 1, the beginning of the parasha, that was really where he says, please bury me, bury me properly. Don't bury me in Mitzrayim. Then he should have said, even though I didn't have a chance to bury your father. Why is he throwing it in here? That sort of needs to be understood. But what we see from here is two takes, both by Rashi and Ramban. We're going to see now as to exactly what the purpose of this story is. So Ramban says, "Va'ekbareh Hashem," I buried her there. Says Ramban. First, this is Rashi. Now he's quoting, I know that you have in your heart something against me, because I buried her on the wayside. But you should know, I buried her there by the word of God. She should be as a help for her children. So when Nebuzaradan exiles them, the end of the Bayit Rishon, they will pass via her grave, and when they do, Yatzda al Kivra uviksha rachamim alehem. So she will basically daven for them. Right, this is the midrash also that we know about. Shinema, as it says, and obviously quoting the psukim from Yirmiyahu, Kol b'Rama nishma, a voice on high is heard. Rachel muvaka al baneh. Rachel is crying over her children. And Chazal say, so it's the idea that she, so to speak, is, as they pass her grave on the way out of from the exile, that they pass her grave, and it stirs mercy for Rachel to daven for them. Kadosh Baruch Hu, Meshivah, with the mapik. Kadosh Baruch Hu responds to her. Yesh right, there's reward for your actions, etc. And the children shall return to their border. Lashon Rashi. That's Rashi. So Rashi says that when it's saying Meita alai Rachel, he's saying, don't worry, like, it's not apologetics. For Rashi, it's alluding to something deeper, which is that I buried her there for a reason. But Ramban doesn't like this. That's Rashi. And he says in the last line on page 1, but Tzarich al kol panim she remez b'mikra latam shamar ba'agadazo. That this agada, right, this like allegorical reading, this parable, but nonetheless, it should have been hinted to in the Torah, if that is really what the primary purpose. That's what the primary purpose was of the story. That don't worry, I buried her for a reason. It should have been. So Ramban's not so happy about Ramban's Ramban is not so happy. Rashi's saying that I buried her for a reason, don't worry. But much more, it's apologetics. And that's what he says now at the top of page 2. He says, V'al derech hapshat gam kein amar lo kaved ken commit natzel. That really, pshat, the simple way of understanding it, says Ramban, is simply he is mitnatzel. He is apologizing. Shelo yichar le Yosef. That Yosef should not get angry when he sees his desire to be buried in the cave of Machpelah. Al shelo kavar imoshav. He shouldn't be angry with the fact that he didn't bother, so to speak, to bury his mother there. This isn't because some deep plan, but rather simply he's apologizing that he shouldn't have animosity towards him. And this is fascinating now. The kasher kavar shamet Leah, just as he buried Leah there. So we have this idea that, don't forget, Leah is buried there. It's not only that Rachel's not buried there, but Leah is buried there, which is fascinating. I'll get to that in a moment, but Rabban is also going to talk about it. V'lakach amarlo, and therefore he says to him, Ki meita be'eretz Canaan v'lo nikbara b'chutz la'aretz. He's saying, don't worry, at least I buried her in Israel, in Eretz Canaan. She's not buried in Galut. And also says Machlok exactly where Rachel's buried, and is Kever Rachel actually Kever Rachel? Who knows? But what's clear is that she was buried in Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Canaan. He's saying, at least I buried her, even though, says Ramban, he says, I know you're angry, I didn't bury her at Machpelah, but at least I buried her, made sure she was buried in Eretz Canaan. If I die here and you don't take me up, I'm not even going to be buried in Eretz Canaan. She's coming from that angle. He's coming from the angle of, at least take me up to Eretz Canaan. Umeita baderech bepeta, because she, at least I managed to bury her in the land, and whereas I'm going to die in Mitzrayim. Umeita, third line there, Umeita baderech bepeta. Bitom, she died suddenly on the way. V'lo yachol lekivra sham. He was unable to bury her there in Ma'arat Machpelah. And then he says, Ki ech ya'azov et banav. This is Ramban being pragmatic again. Ki ech ya'azov et banav et miknehu baderech. How's he going to leave his children and all the flock, his cattle on the way? He's going to go really quickly with her to the cave of Machpelah. Where all the doctors and experts, rufuot and the medicines, to embalm her. And that's why it says alai. Meta alai Rachel. She died upon me. In other words, suddenly she died on me, right? Like all of a sudden, out of the blue, right? She died in childbirth. It was unexpected. What is he going to do? I was going to, let's say Ma'arat Machpelah is where it is today. So he was going to leave. Let's say Kever Rachel is where it is today. Like, assuming that Masorah is correct. So even then, we're at South Yerushalayim. So what are you going to do? He's going to leave all the children there, and either he's going to schlep them all to Hebron and back again, or he's going to go leave them all and take her body to Hebron. So he says, even though in theory it's half a day's travel, if anyone's been stuck on the traffic on Route 60, like I have, they'll know that it's at least half a day's travel. Then Yaakov was heavy, was dense with a great amount of cattle, uvnei bayit, and household. He couldn't leave them, and it would take them many days. You try walking with the kids down all the way to Hebron, even by camel. And that's why it took him so many days. Why did it take so long to get to his father in Hebron? It takes a long time. In actuality, it did take him a very long time. Shanu Chachamim and the sages said that's a different matter. But so what do we see from here? That you're supposed to bury things appropriately. And do it in a proper manner. Of course, my katan, but in a very obscure manner. I'm not going to go into it now. But basically, what's he doing is he's saying that I couldn't have buried her that way, but at least she was buried in Eretz Canaan. So he says that's not pshat level. Again, we know we have pshat. We also have drush. So he's saying that the pshat is. If you look at the Pshuto Shel Mikra, the simple understanding is that he's basically apologizing. He's saying that, yes, I couldn't do it, and so he should. So he should apologize for burying her on the way. So whereas Rashi, goes more to the drush direction of, well, it works very well for generations to come, and the symbol of Rachel, Mevaka al Baneha, Rachel is, crying over her children in Galut. It's, right, exactly. but she didn't choose it. But it worked out well. He's saying that I was physically unable to do it.
That makes more sense if you say that Rachel's very closer to Shiloh.
Right. If she's really buried in Shiloh, not Binyamin. So it's funny because I didn't bring this here, but Ramban used to think she was buried in Shiloh. He said, like in Kol Ramah, a place called Kol, doesn't mean a voice on high, but it means a voice in Ramah. That's one of the claims that that's really where she's buried. But then he says when he came to Eretz Canaan, Eretz Israel, see when he was there, he changed his mind and actually thinks it is. Many other people go the other way. They say when they see the landscape, they actually think that Rachel might not be buried there, because that would mean that on the way to Bavel, they're passing her grave, then they're going south in order to go back up to Bavel. That's why some people don't like it. But yeah, no, but that's exactly what other people say. Some people say that's the natural road. You know, you go out of and then you come round. So that will the geography side of things I won't talk about now. But simply, yeah, he's apologizing. That's how Ramban sees it. He's saying, yeah, I feel bad about this, but practically, what could I have done? She died on the way, and that's Meta Alai Rachel. She died on me, literally suddenly. And again, he says again, so that next paragraph there, Va'ani savor, and I hold, so I believe, shahayu elu divrei hitnatzlut, that these were words of apology. V'gam Yosef yodeh shemeta b'derech v'nikbara ba'aretz, and Yosef also knows that she died on the way and she was buried in the land. Uchvod asala b'mota, and he showed a great honor in her death. So what's the idea? Aval kavanah leYaakov, but Yaakov's intention is, unlike what Rashi said, he's saying shelo holichota lema'arat. It's specifically the issue is that the fact that he didn't take her to bury her in the cave of Machpelah. Kadei shelo yikbar sham shtei achayot. So this is fascinating. He didn't want to bury the two sisters there. Ki yevosh me avotav, because he was ashamed of his fathers, that he married two sisters. We know the Torah prohibits obviously marrying two sisters, even when polygamy was permitted. To marry two sisters was prohibited. Even though this is prior to Matan Torah, but still it's that idea of Ramban looking at they held some sort of standards. And he says, V'Leah hi haniset lo rishona beheter. So because he married Leah first, albeit unintentionally, he's the one he married beheter, like in a permissible way. For Rachel, as Rachel ba'avato beneder asher nadara lekacha. Due to his love of her, he married her by obtaining the vow he'd already vowed to her. The one that he always wanted to marry. In other words, he says that it wasn't appropriate to necessarily have the two sisters buried there, when that's like a symbol, like when the Torah comes around, something which is prohibited for the two sisters to be buried there as his wives, which is also an interesting topic in of itself, because it's saying that Ramban is taking the idea of the fact that the Avot kept the Torah not necessarily allegorically, but there's actually something to it in Ramban's thought. Whereas many others might disagree that it's more of an allegorical saying that the Avot held certain standards. He's saying no, that there was literally something to it, that he wouldn't want to bury the two wives together because they're sisters, right? And also he says Ki yevosh avotav is always embarrassed from his fathers, like what will that I married two sisters. But clearly that's what he wants to say, that might be why he didn't take her to Machpelah. But the reason number one is simply it wasn't feasible. It wasn't viable to do that when you had everyone away. And we know it took him a long time to actually did get to Hebron with all the family. So that was clearly proof. But he also has this other point here, if you like, a more halachic point, which is fascinating just to see in his words. So I just thought I wanted to show that other reason as well. I will say one thing though. When it comes to the end of his life, and I'm going to pull up the psukim here. When it comes to I do not have this on the group on the sheet, but I'll bring it up and then whoever's at home gets a benefit of this. What happens when Yaakov actually does die? So he says, "Please bury me in the Mount Machpelah," and he doesn't just say, "Please bury me in the Mount Machpelah." He says as follows. I'm going to read you the psukim. He says as follows. He says, "Please bury me," and this is the end of. It's not on the. I'll just read it out loud to you. He says, "Ba'amara asher b'stei haMachpelah." Bury me in the cave in the field of Machpelah. Asher pnei Mamre. Asher kana et Avraham made from which Avraham bought from Ephron. Right. Shama kavru et Avraham et Sarah ishto. There they buried Avraham and Sarah his wife. Shama kavru et Yitzchak vet Rivka ishto. V'shama kavarti et Leah, full stop. Right? So he says, it says that literally that you're waiting almost, on the one hand, you want to wait for V'shama kavarti et Leah. He wants to say Leah ishti, Rachel ishti, but he can't say Rachel ishti because she's stuck on the way. It's like the drama. So V'shama kavarti et Leah. He doesn't say Leah ishti. It's fascinating. Like it's a very pregnant pause though. Right. Well, I mean, it was clear that he had to be buried in the family plot, exactly. Right. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating because he sees still that even if like Yehuda, and on one hand he gives Yosef some of the Bechorah, right? He has a double portion, but we're going to see in a minute that Yehuda has the bracha of the Melucha, that Yehuda is the king. So in one sense, Yosef is his the Bechor because he gets a double portion. On the other hand, who is the king? Well, Reuven was out because of what happened with Bilhah. Shimon and Levi are out because of what they did with Shechem. Yehuda becomes the king. Melucha, the kingship comes from Yehuda because he is basically the Bechorah. So it's fascinating that he's the Bechor. He has the Bechorah. So Yehuda in one sense is the Bechor and Yosef in the other. And he was never going to, it's fascinating because he was never going to give, however much he loved Rachel over Leah, he was never going to give the title of Melech to Yosef. That was never part of the plan. So he's Bechor of the mother, right? So that for Pidyon Haben, that's important. But when it sort of comes to continuing the patriarchal line, literally here, so that's the question. But still, we see here that he buried Leah because he felt that it was the right thing to do because Rachel was on the way. So inevitably, his lot was decided for him by the fact that Rachel died on the way. That he is buried with Leah, although his heart is with Rachel. So I just wanted to read those psukim. It's like that expression of it. You're waiting for him to say Ishti. No, it doesn't. But what he does do is that he calls Yehuda B'ni. Miteref B'ni Alit. And it's the first time that he turns around and he says, because it's always B'ni is usually is associated with the children of Rachel. In the bracha of Yehuda, he says, Miteref B'ni Alit. So Rashi understands it to mean referring to the teref of the B'ni, the sale of the son. Most people understand Miteref. You look at also the Ta'amim, the notes there, the laning notes, it's Miteref B'ni Alita, from you arose, my son. So he refers to Yehuda at the end also as my son. So it's fascinating though that so like Leah is buried with him, but he doesn't call her Ishti, but my wife. But she is the one in the family plot. Sorry. Right. It could. I mean, we know the Torah went last week's parasha when they're all descending to Egypt. Torah says, "B'nei Rachel Eshet Yaakov." It's clear that that she was the primary wife, and that when we saw that last week when they're descending to Egypt, that she was the one he wanted to marry. The others he was tricked into, or used as basically because he needed more children. And good question. No idea. Where's Hagar buried? No idea. So, but really, Rachel's the one he only ever wanted to marry. So you have to look at it also from Yaakov's perspective, and that. So let's look at this. Let's look at this Hamalach Hagar bracha that he does give. So he says the bracha to this is a bracha that he gives to Ephraim, or at this point Menashe and Ephraim, but he switches them around. Says the Hamalach Hagar, Hamalach Hagar Elotim Yikara Yivarechet Hane'arim, right? The angel who redeems me from all evil, may he bless the boys. V'yikarei v'hem shemi. We're going to discuss that phrase. V'yikarei v'hem shemi, and may my name be called with them or through them. V'shem Avotai, as well as the name of my fathers, Abraham v'Yitzchak. V'yidgu larov b'keref aretz. And may they multiply like fish in number across the land. Vayar Yosef, and Yosef sees, saw ki yashit aviva yad yimino al rosh Ephraim. His father put his right hand on Ephraim, was the younger son. Vayera be'inav, and it was bad in his eyes. Vayitmoch yad aviv lahasirota. He took his father's hand to move it. Me'al rosh Ephraim al rosh Menashe. Put it on Menashe's head because he got it wrong way around. Vayama Yosef el aviv, and he says lo chen avi. Right, Yosef has serious trauma from what happens if you get the sons the wrong way around. And if you start to give cover to the son who's the younger son, and Yosef's like, no, you're not doing this to my kids. Lo chen avi. No, that's not the right way. He's Bachar, he's the older son. Sim yimincha al rosho. Put your right hand on his head. Vayima'en aviv, and his father refused. Vayomer, and he says, Yadati v'ni yadati, I know. Gam hu yelam. Menashe, who's the Bachar, will also be great. Gam hu yigdal, he'll also become great. V'ulam achiv hakaton yigdal mimenu. His younger brother will be greater than him. V'zaral yem elo hagoyim, and his descendants will be full of nations. Vayivarchem bayom ahu leimar, and he gives them a bracha on that day, saying, B'cha yivarech Yisrael leimar. With you, Israel will bless, saying as follows: Yisimcha Elokim Ephraim v'chem Menashe. Right? Vayasem et Ephraim ufnei Menashe, and he puts Ephraim before Menashe, and that's what we do to this day in our brachot. Yisimcha Elokim Ephraim v'chem Menashe. So let's have a look firstly at the first part of the bracha. V'karei v'hem shmi, and may then my name be called on them. So there's two different ways of understanding this. So first he quotes Ibn Ezra here in Tet Zayin. I'm a Rabbi Avraham, right? Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra says, what's the bracha? Shenikru Yisrael al Shem Ephraim ka'asher heim nikrim zera Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov. That Israel, Bnei Israel, shall be called after Ephraim the same way that we're called the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's how Ibn Ezra understands it. V'yikarei v'hem shmi, that my name shall be v'hem, on with them. In other words, my descendants should also be called the descendants of Ephraim and Menashe, the same way that they're called the descendants of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. That's Ibn Ezra's take. Ramban doesn't like it. He says, "Ve'einenu nachon," that's not right. Ki hakatuv on Amar, because the Torah says vahem, through them. V'lo nikra'u al shem Menashe, and and behold, lo nikra'u al shem Menashe. We're not called after Menashe, and it's only maybe that we're called after Ephraim, because we say like the Ephraim b'chorihu. Haven, and we see in Yirmiyahu, it says, Haven Yakirli Ephraim, is Ephraim not dear to me, in Yeled Shashuim, a playful child. So there is some reference to Ephraim, but never are we called Menashe. Maybe it means, if you want to say like Ibn Ezra, it just means that the descendants of Yosef will be called, or the house of Yosef. That name is on us. That Yosef is also a name for Bnei Yisrael. But that's not really what Ramban thinks. Rather, he thinks Vanachon, the true way of understanding it is Yikarei v'hem shemi, that my name shall be called through them, means Sheya'amod zar'am ushmam v'yesh shem Avraham Yitzchak Yaakov nizkar b'hem la'olam. It's rather the other way around. It's not that they become like Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but rather that they join them in becoming like fathers of the nation, like Ibn Ezra wanted to say. But rather, it's that that Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov should be nizkar b'hem le'olam, should be mentioned on them, and that the children of Yosef should always have the blessing or the name of Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov especially. But as we know, Yosef didn't like that he put Ephraim before Menashe, and Vayera be'inav, it was bad in his eyes. Says Ramban, Ulai Yosef hayot hevet Menashe yoter, maybe he loved Menashe more, ba'avo heyoto b'chor, because he was the firstborn. Lachen charlo, therefore he was angry, he was upset that his father was putting Ephraim first. But the real reason I believe, says Ramban, is he simply thought his father had made a mistake and got the wrong way around. And if his bracha was without knowing, like unintentional, then his bracha would never be chal, it would never actually work, so to speak, on them. Because it wouldn't have been in the proper manner through Ruach HaKodesh, because he got the sons the wrong way around. And we know nothing comes comes good if you switch the things around. Look at Rachel and Leah, right? But when Yaakov responds to him, Yadati, B'ni Yadati, don't know, I know exactly what I'm doing, Nit Payes. Then he was appeased. He was content. In other words, he was just simply worried that Yaakov was inadvertently getting it the wrong way around, and he wasn't giving almost like a divinely given bracha, or that his actions were divinely mandated, but it was simply a mistake. When he says, no, Yadati, Yadati, know exactly what I'm doing, then Yosef stopped. And what does he do? He blesses them on that day, and he says, as the Psukim we just read says, Vayivarchem bayomahu. He blessed them on that day. What does it mean bayomahu? Says Ramban, Vayivarchem bayomahu, in Pasuk Kaf, Ta'am bayomahu. The reason it says on that day, because Yosef was pressing him to put Menashe first, because he's the Bukhar. He said he did not want to remove his right hand from Ephraim's head to put it on Menashe. But not only that, but rather he turns around explicitly in that same event on that day. That's why it says on that day, literally in that same meeting, Bifnei Yosef, in front of Yosef, and when he blesses them, so that's why it adds Bayom Hahu It's saying not only that, but deliberately on that day, despite Yosef's concerns, he turns around and on that very day, in that moment, he gives the bracha to Ephraim and Menashe, and he explicitly puts Ephraim before Menashe. And we know the Torah tells us, Vayasem et Ephraim lifnei Menashe. He does it. Why? So Ramban adds 2 words, B'chol birchotav, in all his brachas. In other words, this was not a one-off thing. This was a deliberate act that Ephraim was supposed to receive the bracha before Menashe. Someone asked, is this Rachel or Rachel or Rachel in the chat, asked, if a blessing given by mistake doesn't stick, how does Yitzchak's blessing to Yaakov work when he thought it was Esau? Excellent question. How would Ramban answer that? It was meant to be, right? Or Yosef simply thinks that, or this was just rather Yosef's concern, that he wanted it to be the proper bracha and not to be perhaps it was a mistake here that he thought his father was just simply making, and he was saying, no, I'm doing it intentionally, because he's trying to explain why it is that Yosef didn't object further. But yeah, it's a good question. Because Ramban, we know, especially sees the pshat of what happened there, but know that there is some sort of metaphysical reality that when you get the bracha, it sticks. So that's why Yitzchak said, I can't, what can I do? I already gave the bracha. I'm stuck now. So that's part of the picture. Fine. Okay. But Ephraim and Menashe, Ephraim comes first. Why does Ephraim come first? Ramban doesn't go into the details as to why is it that Ephraim is picked first. But if you look at their names, I think, and this is my own thing, not Ramban, so he can't take the blame, I'll take the blame if you don't like it. Really, it's to do with the fact that what do the names represent? Why is he called Menashe? Ki nashani, and God has made me forget everything in where I am. That Menashe almost, if you like, was the pot, perhaps was born also, was like the negative energy, like the negative aspect of everything. And the fact we don't know too much about Menashe and Ephraim, the characters. What we do know about them is the names that they're given. We have Menashe as Nashani Elokim. God's helped me forget all my suffering. Help Nashani Elokim, not just forget, but forget my far Beit Avi, he says. There's a machloket about how you understand that. Does it mean you forget all the troubles of my father's house? Or no, he's like, I'm done with my parents. That's the name Menashe. Whereas Ephraim is Hifrani, that God has made me fruitful despite everything I've been through. Hifrani. Ephraim is Hifrani, that he's made me fruitful and I'm here, like I'm okay. Like it was a positive spin. And that therefore it could be that the Torah already been telling us the meaning behind the names, is telling us a little bit about the characters of Ephraim and Menashe as well. So that's just something I thought I'd raise. Although Ramban doesn't address directly here why he puts Ephraim before Menashe, but their names definitely do. And the reason behind their names tell us a lot about Yosef's mindset with each of them. So then he goes on and he gives brachas to each of the kids before he dies. Well, does he? Well, Reuven doesn't really get a bracha, he gets a klala. Shimon and Levi also don't get too much. And we look here at the top of page 3, Shimon v'Levi achim. This is he gives them a bracha together because he says they really are achim, brothers in every respect. Shimon v'Levi achim. And listen, this isn't much of a bracha either. Shimon and Levi are brothers. Klei chamas mecherotehem. So what is their trade? Their trade is as acts of violence. B'sodam al tavo nafshi. May my soul not come into their sod, into their secrets, meaning I'm not part of their plans. Big halam al techat kavodi. May my cover, my honor not come into their community. Kiva apam hargu ish. Out of their wrath they killed man. Sonam ikushar, and they also killed like Shar, a young man, or an ox, whatever, however you understand it. Deliberately they murdered. Arur apan, cursed be their face. Ki az evratam. Ki kashata achal kem Yaakov. I'll scatter them around Yaakov. Vafitzem be Israel, and disperse them around Israel. And we know that Levi doesn't have Rusha. They have the Arei Miklat, which is scattered all around, and the Arei Leviim, which is scattered all around Eretz Israel. And Shimon also doesn't have his own land. It's sort of swallowed up in Yehuda's land, in the Negev, which is part of the punishment that they get here. That they try to be achim, standing together and going and they slaughtered the town. So again, I'll go back to what, Ramban was very critical of them, what we saw in Parashat Vayishlach, for what they did. Because what was the original plan for Ramban? Ramban understood the plan was just to deceive them that they wouldn't want to marry Dinah because they'd have to convince the entire city to be circumcised. And they did. But they were supposed to run off with Dinah, and they didn't. They went and killed them all. And they're there. The Torah ends. They're going to make our sister into a harlot, and it looks like people say, you see, Shimon and Levi had the last word. They're right. No, Yaakov in our parsha has the last word. It says he was biding his time, but at the end of his days, he has the last word and says, no, what you did was fundamentally wrong. So here we see Shimon v'Levi achim, says Rambam. Shimon and Levi brothers. Yomar ba'alei achva. It doesn't just mean that they're brothers, they're ba'alei achva, they're united, right? They have brotherhood. Ki yacham levavam alachotam, because together they're, but not only that, but they also have a sense of what it means of brotherhood for the covet of their sister, right? Ki yacham libam alachotam, because their heart became hot over what happened to their sister, right? Meaning they're good older brothers, meaning, well, or they behave not well, but they felt very brotherly. That's the word. It's teaching about them. It's trying to be melamed zchut. It was because of their zealotry for the sense of being a brother to Dinah. That's why they did what they did. Lomar, to say, perhaps they shouldn't have a ginormous punishment. But it's not something that can be easily waived because it was a violent act. But Nachon Ba'inai, the true understanding in my eyes, says Ramban, is Sha'amar, he was saying, Ki Shimon v'Levi achim gemurim. So that was explanation number one, that really they were acting out of brotherly love, but it was totally wrong and misplaced and cannot really be forgiven. Now he says, Nachon Ba'inai, but what can it really mean? Perhaps not only that, but it means Shimon v'Levi achim, they are brothers, achim gemurim. They are real brothers. Sometimes you see two people and they really are brothers. Gemurim domim, they're similar. Umit achim zeh, and they're really like join one to another like brothers. But satamu ma'asehem, they do in their counsel and in their actions, in their advice and their actions, they really were very much brothers in the story. And he says, Ukvar Perashi, in the next paragraph, I've already explained earlier, Yaakov katsaf al Shimon and Levi, that he was angry with Shimon and Levi, but Horgam and Shei Ha'ir, when they killed the people of the town, but Avrusha asu Hamas, because it was a violent act. Kihem lo chatu lehem kalal, because the other people of the town didn't do anything wrong to them at all. Uvar bevrit v'nimolu, that they rather entered the covenant, they did Mila. V'ulai yashuvu el Hashem, maybe they would have repented to Hashem. V'yukulam bichlal anshei beit Avraham, they would have all joined Abraham's household. Umin hanefesh asher asu b'charan, right? Just like we know, the nefesh, the Torah tells us about the nefesh asher asu b'charan, all the people that Abraham and Sarah gathered in Haran, right? Were Makarev, right? Their whole cohort that they had. So this would have been the same thing, that they'd already entered into Mila. Maybe there would have been a positive spin on it, and they went and killed them, and not just Shem, but everyone. V'od Charalon, he was also angry. Shelo Yomru, that people shouldn't say Ki ba'at satona aseh hadavar, that it was through Yaakov's advice that they did what they did. V'yechil Hashem sheyaseh hanavi chamas v'shod, and it would have been a chil Hashem that Yaakov, the Navi, the prophet, was the orchestrator of the violence and plundering that they committed at Shechem. Yaakov wanted to disassociate himself from the entire thing. So at the end of his days, he turns around and says, no. And if you go back to the Pesukim, this is very clear now. With hindsight, look at what does he say in Pasuk Vav at the top of the page? Besodam al tavo nafshi, my soul should come into their sod. What does it mean, their sod? It means their counsel, their secret. I am not part of this, right? And disassociating himself. Bikalam al techad kodim, it might cover not be mentioned in their council, their gathering. That was nothing to do with me. And that's what Ramban is getting at here. That A, what they did was unforgivable, and B, what they did was not under Yaakov's. Yaakov did not sanction it, and Yaakov wanted nothing to do with it. And that he makes very clear at the end of his days. So as well as Reuven with because of what he did with Bilhah, Shimon and Levi also lose the option to be the Bechor. But Yehuda does get ultimately the bracha, and this is almost reminiscent of the second word, the first word after his name. If we look at Yehuda's bracha now, there's a long Rambam, but we're only going to read bits of it. Yehuda, look at the words. Yehuda, ata you yoducha achecha. It's almost like you can imagine, why is he saying ata you? It's almost like, okay, I've dealt with your three older brothers. It's like, finally, Yehuda, you finally I can have something positive to say. It's almost like that. You can hear Yaakov saying, ata you yoducha achecha. It's you, your brothers will give thanks to. He says in Pasuk Chet, Yehuda ata yeduachecha yadcha ba'oref oivecha, your hand on the neck, the back of the neck of your enemies. Yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. Right, here we go. Yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. That the children of your father will bow down to you. Right? Never does Yaakov say that, despite Yosef's dreams, never did Yaakov want the brothers to bow down to Yosef. Yehuda is the Bechor. You might have loved Rachel more, but Yehuda is the Bechor in this sense. Yishtachavu lecha b'nei avicha. Right, the bracha is given that they will bow down to Yehuda. He is the, so to speak, the Bechor. Gur arei Yehuda. Yehuda is like a lion cub. Here, this is what I mentioned before. Miteref b'ni alita, you arose, my son, from prey. Again, and he calls him b'ni. Right, so there's some sort of tikkun here that he's recognizing that Yehuda is his son. Kararavas ka'arech lavi mikimenu, and he crouches like a lion, and a young lion who can raise him. And then the pasuk in Yud, which is very important for us now. Lo yasur shevet Yehuda. A leader will never leave Yehuda, or a legislator mibein raglav, from among his legs, ad ki yavos Shiloh, until Shiloh comes, v'lo yekahat amim, and he will gather together peoples. In other words, the rule comes from Yehuda. Lo yasur shevet Yehuda. What does that mean? Lo yasur shevet Yehuda. So Ramban takes it to mean that it really has, I mean, we know it has halachic grounds. The melech has to come from Yehuda, ultimately. We know there were other kings along the way. There was a problem, says Ramban. Look at Ramban now. Lo yasur shevet Yehuda. A shevet, a leader, shall not turn from Yehuda. This doesn't mean that a leader will never cease to be. Because the Torah tells us what happens when there's an exile. From the Tochacha, it says, Yolech Hashem otcha ve'malkacha she'tokim alecha el goy asher lo yadata. That God will take you and your king that you put over yourself to a nation that you didn't know. Atav avotecha, you and your fathers. V'hinei heimu malkam b'golah. In other words, they get put in Galut, right? Tzidkiyahu is taken down to Galut. The kings of Yehuda are taken down to Galut. So it doesn't mean literally. Aval in Yanal, but it means, second paragraph there, Shelo yasur shevet Yehuda el echad me'echav. That the leader from Yehuda should not be transferred to one of his brothers. Ki malchut Yisrael hamalshel mimenu, that the kingship of Israel who rules over shall be from him, from Yehuda. It's the Yehuda's line. V'lo yimshol echad me'echav alav. And it should not be from one of his brothers. V'chen, and similarly, lo yasur mechokek mibein raglav, that no legislator should leave from among his from his descendants. Shekol mechokek b'Yisrael asher biyado tabat melech mimenu. Any legislator from Israel who has the king's ring on shall be from him. Ki hu yimshol v'yitzaveh b'chol Yisrael. V'lo chotav b'malchut. He has the signet ring of the kingship. Ad ki yavo Shiloh, until Shiloh comes. What's Shiloh? V'lo yikahat kol ha'amim. So he says it there, the second last line in the second paragraph there. V'zeu haMashiach. That's the Mashiach. Ki hashevet yirmoz leDavid. Because shevet, a ruler, shevet literally means staff. Why does it mean tribe? It means staff. The shevet is a staff. It means a ruler. Same way mateh is also a staff, but it's also a tribe. It means a ruler here. The word shevet yirmoz leDavid. That alludes to David. Shehu hamelech harishon. He's the first king. Asher lo shevet hamalchut. That's the real malchut. V'Shiloh, and Shiloh, who beno, it's his descendant. Asher lo yikahat amim, who will gather together nations. In other words, and all the way through to Shiloh. In other words, once we have a king from Yehuda, which is David HaMelech, the first king, there can be no other kings from other tribes, from other shvatim. Shaul could come first, but not that. Even then, Chazal talk about how Shaul, he wasn't anointed with the Shem and Hamishcha. It wasn't the Chazal and the Gemara talk about it wasn't the anointed oil because he wasn't really from the line of Yehuda. He was from a line of Binyamin. Again, you've got Rachel there. But yes, but fundamentally, he's not. That Shaul was before the rule began, and he talks about that's why I don't remember if I bring it here, but he talks about that's why the rule didn't last. That's if he does the top of the next page. But first, let's just do this last bit here, the last paragraph on page 3. Katuv hazer ramaz. This pasuk teaches us ki Yaakov himlich shevet Yehuda al echav. This is very important that Yaakov chose to put Yehuda as melech, the tribe of Yehuda as melech over his brothers. The horish Yehuda hamemshela al Yisrael. He inherited to him the rule over Israel. But who Mashe Amar David? This is why David says, "Vayivchar Hashem Elokei Yisrael bi." God Israel chose me. Mikol Beit Avi, from my entire house of my father. Liot lemelech al Yisrael olam. Ki beYehuda bachar lenegid, because he chose Yehuda as a ruler over Beit Yehuda Beit Avi. and Beit Yehuda, the father over my father's house. Ubivnei avi bi ratzan hamlech al Yisrael. It's a passage from Divrei Hayamim. That basically God chose him. In other words, Yaakov gives the bracha to Yehuda. You are going to be the kings. And this is important though, because we know there were other kings even after. Firstly, there was the Malchut Israel. There was the breaking up of the kingdoms. But more than that, there's something in Beit Sheni that happened. And we'll talk about that to end off. So just over to page 4. I want to skip down actually to the middle of the page. I mentioned Shaul. Shaul was never going to last because he was never the ultimate kingship, and he discusses that. But in the middle of the page, you see there's just a 1 and a bit lines. Ulafi da'ati in the middle. So Ulafi da'ati, in my opinion, says Ramban, Hayu hamalachim hamalchim al Yisrael meshash vatim achrei David. Any other kings from different tribes who ruled over Israel after David, Ovrim al dat avihem ma'avirim nachala. They were going against the word of the father here, Yaakov. They were transgressing, and they were being ma'avirim, and they were taking away the proportion of literally taking away the heritage of Yehuda. And he says, V'zeh, in the next paragraph, V'zeh haya onesh ha'chashmonayim shemalchu b'bayit sheni. This, we just have Hanukkah, this was a punishment on the Chashmonayim who ruled in Bayit Sheni. They should not have been kings. They should not have been rulers. Ramban is famously in our parasha on this pasuk critical of the Chashmonayims taking the rulership as kings. Ki hayu chasidei elyon. They were supposed to be the chasidim. They were supposed to be the supreme chasidim. They were kahanim. They weren't kings. And if not for them, the Torah would have all been forgotten from Israel, because the Greeks would have basically Hellenized all the Jews completely. But even so, that they were great kings, they were punished with a great punishment. That the 4 of the kings of the Chashmonayim, 4 of the sons of the Chashmonayim, who ruled one after the other with all their might and success, right? The Hasmoneans line was made extinct at some point. And their final punishment reached. Just to Chazal say in the Gemara, anyone who says I am from the Hasmonean dynasty is an Eved. They all became part of this Avon. They were all cut off. Their line cut off, and they fell into slavery. They should not have been the kings. And despite all the great things they did, this was a problem. And he quotes, just to end off this top of this last paragraph, for Etiv Yerushalmi, he quotes Yerushalmi but Masechet Horiot, which says, Ein moshchin melachim kohanim. You're not supposed to anoint Kahanim as kings. In other words, what's Ramban telling us here? You have the spiritual leadership that takes one thing, and the technical rulership should take another. Don't mix. I'm not saying he's saying don't mix religion and state. That's definitely not what he's saying here. But he's saying don't mix whoever the spiritual leader is, that the chief rabbi shouldn't be the king. Okay, the chief rabbi shouldn't be the prime minister. They're 2 different roles, and they have fundamentally different things here. And that's what the Chashmonayim failed in. And that's why Lo Yasor Shevet Yehuda. We know Levi becomes the Leviah, which serves the Kuhuna, and the Kohen Gadol comes from Levi. Yehuda is a different tafkid, and you must not mix the 2 tafkidim together. You have the role of the Kohen and the Levi, which is a spiritual leader. They do the avodah in the Beit HaMikdash, and then you have the Melech, who is the ruler of the people. He is the leader, and you must not mix leadership up with priesthood. They're 2 fundamentally different things, and that's something which we saw unfortunately happened in the days of the Chashmonayim, which was great, but he says that was a problem, and he's critical of them for that, because that was direct prohibition. They should not have been the kings. They could be the leaders without being kings. So that is really but this is a big thing in Ramban's thought, not mixing Kahuna and Malchut, that they really are separate crowns. So you have the Keter of Malchut, you have the Keter of Torah, you have the Keter of Kahuna, and we don't mix. And nothing comes good when you mix politics and religious leadership. The things have to be separate. That doesn't mean that the technical leader and the king shouldn't be religious and shouldn't have that, but he's not the Kohen, and the Kohen is not the Melech, and they're distinct roles. And that's something which Ramban raises here. But ultimately, it's Yehuda who has that line. But again, I'll just raise, to end off that idea, that Yehuda is the one who receives the Melucha. And it is a racha, even though the portion was given to Yosef out of his love for Leah, the Melech is Yehuda, and it's fundamentally always going to be from Yehuda that Mashiach comes. How did Levi merit the Kahuna? That's a fascinating point. I mean, it looks like it comes more from what happened with the Egel HaZahav, that Levi are the ones, right? Levi, right, through Aaron, right? Through Aaron, but also it says all B'nai Levi, right, mainly Shemelai, and all B'nai Levi assembled. And it seems that from there, at the end of Shemot, that they received the Kahuna. Yeah. Even Moshe was ready from Levi, right? It's fascinating. But again, Moshe was never going to be a Melech. He's a Navi. So he's the Navi, right? They'll come to Israel, Moshe, or Navi, right? Moshe was the ultimate Navi. But it's a spirit. He was a spiritual leader. And the idea of once you settle and you want to have establish some sort of monarchy, it was Yehuda, the ones who exhibit true leadership. We saw that through his taking responsibility of Tamar and the whole tshuva process he goes through, and he defends Binyamin. So we'll leave it there. I'm happy to keep going next week and the week after. I think possibly the first week of January, we'll have a week. I was going to turn around and I would never say something. If I was to turn around and say that's why you shouldn't have religious parties in the government, then I'd be getting in trouble, because I'd be mixing politics and religion as well. That's not my place. So anyway, have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Take care.